Hello, Shalom. Blessed Sabbath to you all. Hope everyone is keeping well. We're going to continue with the theme of the second coming, relating it to the second Exodus and the reconstitution of Israel. For those who may be watching, who do not know, I talk from a Hebraic roots, Torah observant, Messianic framework, and if you want to subscribe to this channel, feel free to do so. This week we're going to be looking at not just the second coming and the reconstitution of Israel, but how Israel looks and the uniqueness of the idea that Joseph is resurrected um, in that day. And I think this is very fitting. I've been meditating on this for a long time. I'm not alone in this um, position I'm going to put forward. But I really think there's some importance to this and to again learn the story. Um, Now, what we know is that all of the nations have had for the last 2,000 years since the cross the right to accept or reject the gospel and to bring the kingdom of heaven uh, into their culture, into their lives, and and yet, at the second coming, at the resurrection of the dead, he's going to gather the elect from the four winds. And that elect appears to still be very much from an Israelite, an Israel, a Jacob Israel kind of perspective. Let's look at a few scriptures just to highlight this. The one I'm mainly going to be looking at is from Zechariah 10, where we have um, the description of the end days again. He will strengthen the house of Judah and will save the house of Joseph. Um, it's a fascinating verse again. It has Israelite context. Hosea 1 is another one where again we've got these two portions, Judah and Joseph. Here, Joseph's most frequent title is actually Israel. And here we see anyway, we get the children of Judah and the children of Joseph being mentioned here as well in an end days setting. And let's see what else we have. Isaiah 11, I read this last week. We went through it. There as well, we see there's this the two portions, the two houses are mentioned there. The outcasts of Israel, again, this is about Joseph. It could be the banished. That would actually be a better phrasing. The banished of Joseph. Um, the forsaken, we know they were divorced, and then the dispersed, more punished of Judah, but in covenant. And here we also get the other terms of Ephraim, again, another synonym for Joseph and Judah. And these are end days um, context. Another passage that you should all know is Ezekiel 37, where here we have as well, it is end times setting. We may think God rechanged his covenants and replanned things and has abandoned an old thing in the Old Testament. But as Messiah would call those books, this is the law and the prophets, and God is faithful in and true to what he has written. And so we see, no, he has set Israel in the midst of nations, and he's worked through the punishing and the diaspora and the dispersion of the tribes. Um, and so we look at these passages and we can see as well what should be surprising, and I hope you get this, is that to see the mentioning of Joseph here in all of these, and it's not just Judah, which represents the Jews, that should be a shock to many, because this is a mystery. Um, it's out the blue. It's a forgotten topic. It was meant to be. That's what makes it such a challenge to talk on sometimes. That we see that no, Joseph is somehow alive, restored, and Messiah is central to this issue. And I think it's very fitting that we have this description. As I said, I want to go through the Zechariah 10 passage in particular, but we have this description there of, in the end days, I will strengthen the house of Judah and I will save the house of Joseph. And what's interesting there is the idea of I will strengthen the house of Judah, strengthen is kind of a softer form of um, of reviving. I don't know how else to say it. Like through His Spirit, through His workings amongst men, so we can have this understanding with Judah. We have literally seen this, that the God of heaven has worked in the hearts of various nations to afford the return of Judah to the land. They have been inspired and um, enthused and have courage to defend it and to make their stake there. You really get the sense of He has strengthened them. With the I will save the house of Joseph, this I really believe we can have the view of uh, no, when we see this kind of terminology, it's got this greater sense of He's rolling up His sleeves, and by my own arm am I going to save. And it's a lot more direct. It's a lot more in keeping with, and this is what I'm trying to thread it with, the idea of, wow, when Joseph comes alive, there's going to be no doubt. We're not going to give any praise to any men or whoever may have helped with uh, in the circumstance. All glory here, it will literally be the hand of God, the divine coming of Messiah on the clouds of glory, gathering His elect, and a resurrection of Joseph, this the a reconstituting of Joseph as well in that day. So um, let's look at how we got to this place. How did we get to the place where Joseph is considered dead? Today, we know who the Jews are. It's very much a mystery, and it was meant to be. Even as we look out in the world today, there's perhaps some ideas concerning Joseph. However, it's generally just dry bones at this point, and a bit of guesswork here and there. Um, but but what's important is to understand why, and understand it is good that in the end days, that when there's the resurrection of nations, that that Joseph be highlighted in that time, because this is a great working of God that goes right back. Um, let's have a look. So, for those who don't know, how do we get to this point? Well, the nation of Israel was united at one point. We had the kings Saul, David, Solomon, and Judah was very much leading at that time. And and at some point there was a split in the kingdom. Jeroboam led 10 tribes to the north. The prophet told him that this would happen. And, well, Rehoboam wanted to unify the nation. You would think this is a good thing, and that's what he wanted to do. And that's what he tried to achieve. And Solomon left it in a way. I think Solomon could tell this was going to happen, this break. Anyway, Rehoboam controlled the army. He could put down this coup, as it were. However, but for the voice of God speaking to a prophet called Shemaiah. You can read about this in Kings and in Chronicles, and basically just saying, listen, this division of kingdom that's happening right now, this is of Elohim. And it's amazing how many people have no idea what this is about. We've been blinded in many ways to see why the separation and how this was of God. And in fact, it's very important because we look through universalize. This is a problem with the Christian world, and we should. But to realize at one point, really, God was working through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and one nation alone. His ultimate vision was for the nations, but it really was Israel's God. As even Messiah would say, it was only at the cross that there was full accomplishment of the gospel legally. You remember that phrasing of "do not give what is sacred to the dogs." And even though people point to, no, you had Ruth and you had a mixed multitude, you had to join the tribes of Israel. There was only one nation you could belong to. And that was going to change, and it did change. We know he said his house would be a house of prayer for all nations. The Jews did not take that really well. But this was achieved. But how is what's important. And so we know with this division that happened here, this would ultimately lead to the legal grounds for the nations coming into covenant and partaking in Israel's God. And the forming of an extra portion, we know, is connected to this idea of Israel being a firstborn, God's chosen nation being a firstborn, is that they would be given a double portion. And what is a double portion? What's the extra portion for? Well, the extra portion is given sacrificially for brothers. And so we know that Joseph was given sacrificially for brothers. And when you think of sacrifices, once consumed, what do you think of? You think of bones, right? You think that's, and it's kind of like that. And you can read Ezekiel 11, Isaiah 28 to realize that they really were given up to the nations by Judah through the hand of Messiah. It's no different with Joseph in Egypt, where, you know, certain people that may have wanted it for certain reasons, but as Joseph would say in the end of days, but God meant it for greater things. So Judah hired Assyria, it would seem, the scourge of death spoken of in Isaiah 28, that they came down to remove their brother. However, God had greater plans. And we can begin to see ideas of this with Messiah saying things like, um, um, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, how will it bear much fruit? And so with Joseph, we actually do get this idea of being sown. I'm going back to that Zechariah 10 passage, but in the context of, yes, Judah is strengthened, Joseph is described in the context of Ephraim, Joseph, these tribes in particular. We have Zerah, the idea of they were sown. And even though we may think of bones, it's like you're given this hope of resurrection because they will remember me in far countries. They're going to come back to have an understanding or being mindful of him in far countries. And so we see it this particular with this part of the nation that we get this idea of sown. But sown comes with the cost of dying. Unless a grain of wheat goes to the ground and dies, how can it bear much fruit? So another place that we see this is with Hosea chapter 1. You can read it for yourself, but the first child in particular uh, exemplifies this understanding, given the name Jezreel, and it's got that Zarael, son of Elohim, son of God, that this house was to be sown of God, and understand that's been lost with time. And then we see again end times narrative. However, somehow, even though you would think of as dead, described as not my people, not my loved one, they come alive, and it even says that they shall come up out of their land right at the end. Uh, that might also be a bit of a resurrection motif, but anyway, we get great shall be the day of Jezreel. So even though it means scattered or sown, there's a great purpose in this. And so we see that with the original disciples, um, they knew who to credit. They did not say the Jews were the Holocaust, or try and say a burnt offering for the nations, or try and take on Isaiah 53 as we are the people hard done by for the nations, persecuted, sometimes brutally persecuted, but they didn't do that. They would quote in Romans 9:25, 1 Peter 2, 9 to 11, they would quote about the house of Joseph, that no, they would refer to those people in becoming not my people. So those who are not my people and not God's loved one, the other nations could partake of, and Paul comes up with the phrasing, of a commonwealth of Israel. That's the blessings of Jacob may go to other nations, as it were. And so we see this is how it was achieved. It's not that Joseph was righteous or Joseph is the atonement, but it really seems to be a legal pattern that God had to sow a nation to reap the nations, and that the blessings that flow from Messiah and what he did for us on the cross, on that execution stake, may flow to the nations because of the legal precedent, or that legal right that was established through the sowing of that nation. So even when I try and push back on typical understandings that when we read of, oh, because of unbelief, branches have been broken off, Romans 11, that you may be grafted in. This is not about the house of Judah. This is not about the Jews. In fact, I believe in many ways, although not perfect and don't always shine the light, um, as the covenant people, and others maybe shine it better, and we stumble in this regard, but they very much are for the kingdom. We see them as maintaining the Sabbath and the festivals and clean and unclean, the commandments of God as being important. However, it's these others that were let loose. You can read Hosea. They were to go be abandoned and, well, disregarded, and chase after your lovers. You have nothing to do with my Sabbaths, have nothing to do with my festivals, eat unclean food, go and do your thing. And, well, but we do read in Romans 11, and again, I apply this to those tribes, not to the Jews, that concerning the gospel, Romans 11, 28, concerning the gospel, what did Paul say? That they are enemies for your sakes. They became as dead bones, dead to God, dead to the covenant for your sakes. And I would apply it to these tribes. But as touching the election, they are beloved for the Father's sakes, for the gifts and calling of God are without repentance. For as you in times past did not believe God, yet now obtained mercy. This is phrasing used specifically concerning the northern tribes, through their unbelief. Even so have these also now not believed, that through your mercy, so the hope was through your mercy, through the nations now partaking in the covenants of promise, partaking in the goodness that flows from Jacob, that they again may leave their unbelief and come to believe. And so that was the hope in Paul's day. Now, some of you might say, well, this is a sad situation. Blessings for the nations, but sad for the bones of Joseph, as it were. And so, what about those tribes? And I've spent a lot of time um, researching, trying to understand what happened. And what's interesting is when you go to, even though Hosea says this, Hosea marries someone called Gomer, which is quite interesting because those tribes are actually sent to lands that were related to Gomer, um, a former patriarch of the world, um, and Ashkenaz, and perhaps the Sake, and on the northeastern boundary of the Assyrian Empire, put into buffer zones, and it's very much a hard topic to understand. It really, they were sold out, and the Assyrians were the best at removing identities of people. And so it's very much fitting with the biblical narrative of Joseph becomes Zaphnath Paaneah. He's married into Heliopolis. Uh, you know, children are these half breeds. It's not so easy to determine. And but what's significant is that despite what we see with our eyes, as we read in the beginning of this teaching, there are so many prophecies about no, the house of Joseph, that house of Israel, not just Judah, that house of Israel will return to the land. Makes me think of Joseph. He's unique that when you think, okay, just forget about him, he's so unique in some ways. I think of when he, um, when he was looking forward to he's going to die one day, and he said, "Listen, Israel, when you leave Egypt, take up my bones, carry them up out of the land." It's as though for him, his connection to the resurrection of the dead, his connection to the idea of a dead idea, but somehow remaining alive, it's very much connected to him, and so I think we have grounds to think of um, no, this will be a revived topic, and it should be thought of something as dead in these days, but God will bring it to life, our Messiah when He returns. So, in terms of the bones of Joseph, that yes, for the man it was that way, but also with the nation of Joseph, it was that way. We can read about this in, uh, well, we see this with Cyrus made decrees, and that was a massive empire. You may return. And who do we see return? It's just the three Jewish tribes, or the two, however you look at it. It's just the house of Judah that returns. We see that in Ezra. Darius the Great, he as well, for his empire. But all we see is just the house of Judah maintained. Artaxerxes as well, various people, but it's as though Joseph is gone. And that is kind of the way we should look at it. However, I'm reminded how I would almost say it is kind of like Joseph is dead bones, but for the hand of God. So I put this passage here. Jacob, I think, even had this understanding. When he saw what had become of his son, he, in his blessing over Joseph, it's unique in that he gives phrasing that would refer to the personal presence of God in their midst, Mashiach, where he would speak about the Abir, the mighty El of Jacob, that his hands were made strong by, again, it's this idea of saved. No, there was direct intervention here. Someone watched over him. Even the use of the Almighty, the Shaddai, that again is often used for Messiah, the Malach Yehovah, that no, the Shaddai watched over him. He would be dry bones, but for the Shaddai. Again, I think this would point to the resurrection motif as being at the second coming, that direct hand of God with the one coming on the clouds of glory. What else do I have here? Um, okay, it was also seen before in the chapter before over Joseph's children. Again, this one comes out the Malach, the sent one of God. The blessings are really connected with this theme of Yosef and the Israelites that he represents and leads. And we see even the multitude in the midst of the earth that no one will be watching over over them. What else do I put here? Yeah, it made me think as well of when Yeshua did come and he says, "Go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." So direct, but that's the point, I think. I have come for them is this very direct sense of purpose to achieve this greater redemption of all of Jacob. And where things seem really lost, no, the Lord of glory will maintain this theme and will even if it's resurrection from the dead, he will keep it together. Another passage I love, I didn't put it in, I don't think, but you can go to Deuteronomy chapter 33, and there you'll also see that um, it speaks of the goodwill of him, as again in a Joseph context, where Moses is seeing him somehow inheriting the the, the greatest lands of the planet, fertility, getting all this imagery out there, and it is described as not just, just through the spirit, but it is this idea of by the goodwill of him who dwelt in the bush. Again, it's this really direct presence of God who's going to watch over and maintain this theme. Also there as well with Joseph, very different to Judah in terms of Jewish diaspora, but no, with Joseph it also says he will push the nations to the ends of the earth as an ox and as a ram. Um, Again, this could only be, if you know where they were placed on those boundaries, this could only be through the direct help of Messiah. Something also, yeah, is seen in Ezekiel. I didn't put it in, but he actually says this. We see this where I will be a sanctuary to them in the nations where they have gone. Ezekiel 11. You can read that there as well. You can connect the dots. All right. Um, so I think the thing is that I think it's quite fitting in a second coming context that he will gather also the dispersed of Judah, that is, they as well, when they rise from the dead, there'll be Judah returning. But I really believe the reconstituting of Joseph will happen at that time as well. And we're going to see an interesting passage that I think proves this. Ezekiel 37 uh, um, brings up this issue as well of the dry bones. Often we see, oh, the house of Israel, I will breathe into you and you will have life again. You know that passage. Often it's applied to the Jews. It really could be metaphorical with them. They always maintain their identity. But it's more fitting, actually, with how the house of Israel is used in other ways by Ezekiel to refer to those northern tribes. That, no, if we're going to use this bones metaphor of coming alive, I think of Joseph, the exhuming of his bones in particular, and wow, this and the connection, obviously, in where is that, Ezekiel 37, is so connected to the resurrection of the dead. I think we really have something to see here, and we're not just trying to make something out of nothing here. All right, and what's interesting is that when we look at the geopolitics of today, and going back again to that passage, just remember, I will strengthen Judah, the house of Judah, but I will save, that more direct, save the house of Joseph. In the end times manner, we see that Judah has been strengthened. There is no doubt. Um, and what's very interesting is to see, because we're going to compare this to another passage, to see the greater hand of God in establishing Joseph, who is doubly cursed in a way. But we see the lands that Judah has been afforded, strengthened with to possess, we can see what they are. There are the Negev in the south, there's Judea and Samaria, there is Galilee, Bashan, Golan. And it's really interesting to see how this is played up, because in an end times narrative, there are certain lands that Zacharias seems to, well, he does, he says directly, are to be liberated by the one who combines Israel together. And it's not these lands. And I think it alludes to the directness of this one battling and establishing Israel and the part that cannot be established by man. This requires the hand of God to the point that man will not say it was because of us. This was Elohim, exactly like the Exodus, where it was by the hand of God. So um, let's look at what it says. It's really interesting here. So in Zechariah 10, where it talks about the house of Judah and the house of Joseph, it then moves on to talk about Ephraim. Again, you need to understand this is talking again about Joseph, those tribes in particular. And we see that they will be as a mighty army. This is through the work of God. Their heart shall rejoice as through wine. Yes, their children shall see it and be glad. Their heart shall rejoice in Jehovah. I will hiss for them. Again, an end times narrative, gathering his elect. Uh, gather them, for I have redeemed them, and they shall increase. They have increased. I will bring them again also out of the land of Egypt. That's metaphoric for the place of exile, and gather them out of Assyria. Again, they've migrated most probably from there according to the scriptures, but Assyria is again another connection to exile. And will bring them, and this is what's really interesting, is this description. I will bring them. So he strengthened Judah, but concerning Joseph, this mystery, I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon. This is lands that are currently not in the hands of Judah. The singling out of them stands out. It's really interesting, as though this work will be performed by the hand of God in that direct way. And then also we get uh, just the breaking of minimalist ideas of who Joseph represents in that phrasing there at the end there. Um, and it's going to they're not going to know where to put them. There's going to be so much space, so much um, so many people that need to be placed there, confirming Genesis 48, confirming all the descriptions of bounty and blessing there. So this is quite interesting, and uh, and I think it should stir the Jews to realize there is much you can do, but when the army surround Jerusalem, when in the time of Jacob's trouble, when you go to the scriptures, you will need to at some point say, Baruch haba b'shem Yehovah, blessed is he who comes in the name of Yehovah. You'll need the hand of heaven, and to call upon that one who in your scriptures, there's only one who has the name of the Father in him. We see him in Exodus 23. We see him in the burning bush. And he will come. When you say that, he will come. All right. So yeah, so what can we make of this? Well, I think there's a lot to take. I know perhaps the way I'm phrasing the end days and the reconstitution of things in Israel in the midst of nations may make some people feel nervous, but I think the nations have gone too far in not realizing the Commonwealth, and also God's plan with the tribes has never changed. He's faithful in all his words, no matter how ancient. And that Messiah is in covenant with Judah. They do not always necessarily represent the light well, but neither do the nations that claim faith in Messiah. That we're all called to be a light. Um, and he's not hasty in divorcing and marriage, but um, is very faithful. And we should see that. And you know, I would also say with this issue of Joseph, we're seeing bones, we're seeing resurrection, we're really seeing the hand of God to save. Uh, Despite people may be having ideas of who Joseph may represent in these days, it really seems to be the work of God that ultimately makes this a reality. And I think any work of man to try and achieve this will struggle. Certainly, we sow vision. We prophesy, as Ezekiel says, we prophesy to the bones. We bring up the prophecies, and as we bring up the prophecies, we see the uh, the bones shaking, the sinews coming, and we get a bit of an understanding. I'm not going to take time now to maybe flesh that out, but always remember this. Even in that vision, and we bring up the prophecies and whatever, and it starts to form in our minds, the description there is that, but ultimately, you had to pray for the breath, for the wind. There's that active element that God can only bring, and just to be mindful of that. And really, a lot of the stuff, even the second Exodus, I know people think you have to pack your go bag because when this Exodus happens, we've got to be ready and prepare cities of refuge and as the elect are called. But really, some of these things are presented. They're well shown that it will be greater than that first one, where really the hand of God will restore these things. He will feed, clothe, open the path. We will see in that day and understand. Um, all right, and uh, and so I just want to wrap this up with a few more passages because although it may seem like I'm really trying to make this, we should just have this idea of we die and we go to heaven. Why we even bring this up? It really is at the core of end times restoration theology, this idea of Judah and Joseph and how Messiah unites them. I even believe that when Paul says in uh, he says in Romans, he speaks of the um, let me find it. Sorry, no, I don't know what's happened here. Um, But when Paul says that the creation waits with the earnest expectation of the sons of God to be revealed, you know, we could see this in maybe this about the angels and the second coming, but I really think this is talking about the the head nation of Israel and the reconstitution at the end of the age, and I'll tell you why. But But notice how it's in the context of creation. Paul draws out in Romans chapter 8 about creation is tied to, so the frustration of creation is tied to the manifestation of the sons of God. And even the discontent there, if that when that gets resolved, that is also in the time when healing comes to creation. And I think this really should be applied to the um, should be applied to Israel. And the reason is because from Isaiah 11, we did that last week, but remember there it speaks about and the envy of um, Ephraim shall depart. So Judah's not going to be jealous of envious of Ephraim. And then it says, and the adversaries of Judah will go away again. Ephraim, Joseph is not going to be in an adversarial relationship towards Judah, and it says that Ephraim shall also not envy Judah, and Judah will not vex Ephraim. So there's just discontent in that relationship. But Messiah comes. This is the hope. And we see these opposites and we see these um, typically warring relationship that God has put in the midst of the great grand plan. And it is actually connected to creation. And I think this is what Paul is getting at because go a few verses earlier in Isaiah chapter 11, and you will see just before this, he speaks about the wolf and the lamb will lie down together, the leopard and the kid, the the calf and the young lion. We get these opposites that somehow are coming together. The lion's going to eat straw like the ox, and the suckling child playing at the hole of a snake. Um, and what's important is that phrasing of, and they shall not destroy in all my holy mountain. So there's peace in the holy mountain. For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of Jehovah. We will finally understand who Jehovah is, his kingdom, and everything. And we see this whole theme leads to the restoration of creation. So, yeah, I think just to conclude, I see that the even within this idea of creation, that we see the within what's happening on the earth. I see those lands I see Gilead and Lebanon. It's as though those lands are becoming humbled. It's as though they are crying out to something in a way. Um, and it's really irrelevant what is, oh, this is the UN partition zone, and this is what the nations have decided. The way things are going is that people are going to be pushed more and more. Do you stand with the word and the boundaries given by God? Um, and what we see is that the word will return, and he will give what God has decreed to all of Israel. And what is beautiful in the story of Joseph, as much as we see Messiah being faithful to preserve the Jews, we see we will see in those days even the dry bones of Joseph, that dead topic, that thing we all speculate and wonder about. He will even revive that, and we will be grateful, and the nations will be, um, I believe, will recognize the role of that part of the nation, um, for the blessing of many to partake of Israel's God. As Paul said, that no mercy was shown to one, that mercy may be granted to all. And so it's a mystery. As Paul was saying, it's a mystery. Today we have more information. We can guess a bit, but it still remains a mystery. The bones maybe are putting on a bit of flesh and whatever, but ultimately the hand of God will resurrect this story, and Messiah will even, by his hand, clean out those lands and establish and put his mark and say, these are my people. And so we look to the future, we see what may happen, but it's written in the scriptures. I think there's no denying there that it's still focused on Israel and and that kingdom. Anyway, so many blessings to you. I know I've gone on long. This new format, it's more chatty, so it's got that it's gonna be longer sessions. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this and lots to think about. So many blessings to you, and blessed Sabbath. Shalom.